always been interested in botany, plants. So I love terrestrial plants as well, but the marine plants I found very, very interesting. Love sitting in front of the microscope. Me and the microscope, we're just looking at all these tiny species, whole variety of shapes, sizes. They're amazing, colors, and it was really interesting trying to, learning to identify them. Why is this particular species given this particular name, or what is special about it? Does it have any sort of ecological impact? That sort of thing. Can I use this species to tell me something about what is going into the ecosystem or the environment in which it lives? Phytoplankton, they can tell you so much, give you so much information about what's happening out there in the environment. So it's really an interest and a fascination, for this. And my master's, for my undergraduate degree, I did a double major in zoology and botany. In my master's, I used phytoplankton in a bay called Hunts Bay near Kingston Harbour. I used them to determine the water quality of Hunts Bay, which was fascinating. It was great, and then my PhD now, I moved on to still focusing on marine phytoplankton, but the species that have the potential to produce toxins, which can kind of build up in the food chain, and they can cause problems for humans, marine animals who consume organisms that themselves have consumed these toxic dinoflagellates. So really my PhD was a taxonomic study of the potentially toxic dinoflagellates that occur in Jamaica's coastal waters. So the step up from there now is to, I was hoping to determine the toxins that are there toxins present in these species, and if they are, what is their toxic ability then, or how toxic are they? Because it can have variations in toxicity and their potential impact in particular areas, right? So that was the basis for
all over.
I had 9, I believe it was 9 sampling sites, extending from Portland or Port Antonio straight across the Negril, right across the island, and areas on the south coast and north coast. So there were 9 sites. Some of them were chosen based on what is happening in the area. So there is a place in Morant Bay that I chose where they actually culture oysters for the hotel industry, and I thought that might be a good place to sample, because we want to make sure that those oysters aren't taking in any potentially toxic dinoflagellates. And I'd done some pre-sampling there before to see what species were present in the water first. And when I determined that there could be some potentially toxic species, then you match that with, okay, there's oyster culturing happening here as well. Okay, that needs to be a sampling site. Other areas were areas heavily used by tourists, so for swimming, etc. So those were chosen as sites. Kingston Harbour, which is a area in Jamaica which is known to be heavily polluted, and you typically often do find potentially toxic species occurring in heavily polluted waters. So, and I'd done research there previously, so I knew what species occurred there, and I knew that some of them are known to be toxic in other places in the world. So that, okay, that should be a site as well. So that was a main basis. Falmouth listening waters, of course, of course.
But there have not been cases.
No, there haven't been reported cases. The Paradinium bahamense, var bahamense, which is the species that creates a glistening in the area, has been found to be toxic in Florida, which is pretty nearby.
Yes.
So it's quite possible that our dinoflagellate here that creates glistening could be potentially toxic. So the next step is to try and culture this species and see, is it producing toxins? What are these toxins, and how toxic could they possibly be? So yeah, that should have been the next stage of my work. We'll see what happens.
But it also, in terms of just the phenomena on the island, there might be even more places than 9 sites where the glow is, let's say, throughout the year.
It's possible.
Visible?
It's possible. I haven't really heard anything about that, but in terms of the glistening, this part in the Bahamas that creates glistening, Oyster Bay in Falmouth seems to be the spot. That is the area where you have the heaviest concentrations that allow for this glistening to be visible.
Yes.
Highly visible. I mean, there's so many other species, animals that do produce some sort of, light, and you'll see that at night in various places. But if you're talking about just the dinoflagellate itself, it's Oyster Bay in Falmouth.
So there's also no other case in the last 20 years where people were saying, okay, here we have like a similar glow, like glistening waters, but it's smaller. Or
in Jamaica, no, not that I've heard of. No. So another reason why we need to protect it.
Yeah.
It occurs in areas in Old Harbour, the mangroves along that side there. That's on the south coast of Jamaica. So I mean, it occurs in water there. So I'm sure that if the numbers are high enough, you might see some glistening at night. But I haven't heard anybody talking about it being anything spectacular, anything worth really going to see. So again, Oyster Bay.
But also from the side of the biologists or ecologists, this has never been like a major interest in research. It was just the glowing thing, and then, let's say, minimum monitoring, and now you're kind of investigating the toxicity.
I was supposed to be. That is the thing. Things changed a few years ago, and it's something I want to get back into and focus on. So I think it's really important. The potential for this glistening species to be toxic, Oyster Bay. The potential is definitely there. It would take a lot of work to culture it, because it's very difficult to culture dinoflagellates on a whole. It's also very difficult to culture that particular species because it's very delicate. I know scientists have tried before. They collected samples from Oyster Bay, and after a few months the cultures die. They just can't maintain them. So that would be the first hurdle. If we do get past that hurdle, then we can now, analyze them for toxins, etc. So it take a lot of research, a lot of work to get that done.
Has there been interest, like, let's say, internationally, or connecting the bioluminescent bays, or?
Well, these papers that I found, it showed these persons collected samples from Oyster Bay and the bays in Puerto Rico, other bioluminescent bays worldwide, and I think they were trying to compare them in terms of culturing, because it's like, although they're the same species, they have different needs based on the areas from which they come. So, it was attempts to determine what their needs were and to get them going, see if they could maintain the cultures, and then trying to do toxicity tests, but the cultures just didn't last. They didn't last. So I'm not sure what came of that research, but they published these papers just saying what their attempts were. Yeah, there are a number of studies done in the 60s. Trying to remember the names, Carpenter, and I think it's Seliger. They were looking at just how bright the bioluminescence was, and the factors, the physical-chemical factors that allow them to grow or exist in Oyster Bay. There are a number of studies that were done then. I haven't seen anything after that time, after the late 60s, until I think about the 90s, like you said, interest was showed again. But like I said, it's of great concern to me because the numbers are declining. They're certainly not what they were in the 60s. Papers indicate what the numbers were, the concentrations were of this particular species in the 60s. Very, very high, and I've never seen numbers like that I've probably been looking at these samples, or what samples from Oyster Bay for about maybe the past 10 years or so.
Wow, yeah.
And during that time, you're seeing a decrease, and it's concerning. It's really concerning what's happening, what's going on. We need to, be seriously monitoring the area, trying to determine what's happening. Is there something we can do to help to, reduce, if it's some sort of negative impact from surrounding areas, or can we reduce those impacts, or what can we do to maintain what is left in terms of the concentration of the species out there. So, governing agency. So any sort of construction that is going to go up in what's considered to be a sensitive area, like Oyster Bay, or any hotels that are being constructed along the coastline, they have to, all that information has to be sent to NEPA, and they'll request terms of reference for this structure. They'll request an environmental impact assessment. So whoever is putting up that structure, they would have to employ an environmental body, a company, or whoever, who can do an environmental impact assessment, which is sent to NEPA, and they'll analyze, look at that data, and determine whether that hotel or that structure, are they going to get the permit to go ahead and build or do whatever it is you are asking to do there. So they're definitely interested. They care. So,
But they would also. I think I met another person who is potentially writing these reports.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
how is this possible if it's someone who works as a, I don't know, development assistants cannot write?
The developers would hire one of the the agencies, one of the companies who are, usually do some sort of environmental monitoring companies then. And there are a number of them around. So,
And they don't work with the university. I think this is what is different to things that I know.
Yeah. Many of them actually, were educated by UWI, and then they left, and then they joined an environmental company.
But how
they
is
were trained here then, many of them.
But they don't have like an objectified responsibility or something, because they're working for themselves.
Well, yes, exactly.
So this is, even, I don't know how things are work, but let's say where I come from, this would be problematic, because how can this person kind of decide this in the name of, let's say, all of Jamaica, that this is okay?
Yeah. Well, it's a government agency, so, there are certain guidelines that, NEPA, certain guidelines, yes, they're trained here, and they move on. There are guidelines that they have to follow, the government puts in place, so there are certain things that, you cannot, if this is happening, or if the research shows particular things, there's no permits given in this thing. So they're not necessarily working for themselves, they're working for the government with the guidelines put in place.
So they have and in let's say in the case of monitoring a species, these guidelines then are updated because they cannot be the same like the 60s.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Or whatever kind of research has been around. I'm just thinking about which information is accessible for whom.
Yeah, I would hope that I would think so, that they're keeping up to date with what's happening. Or they keep in contact with persons in the field who are actually, keeping up with monitoring or keeping up with research at the time.
Yeah.
Who would be more aware of what's happening and more educated about that sort of thing. So they have their links to persons, and I would think as a monitoring agency, a governing body, that they as well are, keeping in touch with what's happening. So hope. Yeah. For my research, personal research, I do it myself. Go on the boat. I have to get a permit from Nepal. They need to know that I'm actually going into Iceland collecting water samples first. And then I have to make contacts with Glistening Waters itself, let them know, can I borrow a boat, can we go in, and I take them from the boat there. There are particular sites that I always use. I've been using these same sites over the past 10 years. So I can track what is happening, collect the water samples, and then there I am. Settle them in special chambers that I have. Two of them are sitting there. And then create, negative impacts on the area, so they had to stop and revise. Yeah, I think that's what happened. I mean, I haven't heard, really, but that's what happened. But yeah, so there's this big hotel being constructed there. Once that is happening, NEPA requires that monitoring of the area is done. So physicochemical factors, salinity, turbidity, etc., oxygen content of the water column. Of course, the concentrations of the Paradine bahamense, because we want to make sure that whatever is happening and the construction is not impacting on the species in any way, which is a bit difficult to determine. I mean, it's what samples once a month are collected. I mean, sometimes you don't see the effects until way down the line. They're not immediate, so it's a bit difficult, to determine. But at least we're checking. Are they still there? Are they doing well? Sort of thing. So an environmental company or monitoring agency is hired, I assume, by the hotel, and then they actually asked me if I could do this part of the work to analyze the water samples for the dinoflagellate and just see what species concentration is. So that's what I'm doing. Yeah. So I would think they're looking at the mangroves, if anything is being removed or not. Usually you're not allowed to remove mangroves, especially from that area. The mangroves are so important to Oyster Bay. Because these mangroves produce vitamin B12, of which the dinoflagellates seem to thrive on. They need that and even so, typically you're not allowed to remove mangroves because of their importance from an area. So I'm sure someone is checking on that, checking on the mangroves. If they have to, they would have to replant them elsewhere nearby. So that's always important there. Yeah. So this is just a small part of the monitoring that is going on down there.
But you are at the beginning of your study, let's say, or you are close to finishing, and then you have to give a result of your observation?
We started in December, so I get these water samples once a month. So these are the March samples. This is the fourth set of samples, and I produce a report. So after I analyze these, I'll write a report, send it to the company that hired me, and then they will kind of integrate that into their overall report, and that will be sent to NEPA, and NEPA will review. So NEPA is supposed to be reviewing these reports on a monthly basis to see what's going on.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if they're finding that, okay, there are some problems here, we're not liking what we're seeing, the results are showing possible negative impacts on the area, then they might shut down work or tell them they need to review something or change something in the area. So NEPA is really the
place.
The final say, yeah.
But what I still don't understand, then they don't have like a dinoflagellate specialist there who kind of goes through the data. It would be someone who has an, let's say, overall perspective on the ecology.
Yes, yeah, I would say that. Who could read the reports and say, okay, hopefully the report is written in a way that, they could determine, all right, okay, this is good, this is bad, sort of thing, yeah. But as I said, that's what I was concerned about. I was actually toying with the idea of, could I train someone at NEPA to do this. Because as the governing agency, they should have someone there in-house. You shouldn't have to depend on people out there in the field. You, as the governing agency, should be able to go out there and do it yourself. You don't have to. You're not sure what data is. The data real? Can you trust the data? So it's tricky. And I'd actually love to train somebody there.
Yeah.
In this, just for continuity. That worries me.
But I mean, it's also, if you think of it just in terms of like financing this as a long-term thing, it seems kind of, I mean, the developers should be actually investing in their,
Exactly.
I mean, they are, let's say, not exploiting, but they're using the local site and its species, so they should be interested. But this is not the case so much.
No, I'm sure they are interested, and I'm not sure what plans maybe put in place, but I would think that they should be asked as users of that particular site, can we contribute to something, to monitoring a small monitoring program, just to check as users of the area.
Yes.
I think that should be suggested. It may be there, but I haven't heard of anything like that. Because I'm sure they're going to have tours coming around the spit and into the bay at night. I'm sure, of course.
Yeah, and there seem to be like a lot of people that actually get their salary just from some kind of activity around that.
Yes, definitely.
Just it's toxics are part of our environment more and more, regardless how sensible or in which you don't need to be in war zones, but also in the daily life, let's say the toxicity in relation to our bodies is also getting more. So I'm surprised that in a field like this, there's so much that you already see there's an uncontrollable, let's say, threat.
I mean, I think the problem financially, getting persons, interested, wanting to, thinking it's important, it's worthwhile. It's hard to get funding for these things.
So even when the threat to the fishing industry is
I think people wait
predictable,
until it's on top
it's
of
happening.
them.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not feeling this right now, so hey, I don't care, I'm not putting money into that now, And then when it is now on top of you, a threat, then it's too late, I think that's part of the problem. It would be great to have a network, I mean, people in Puerto Rico, we should be corresponding, doing research, have a database, so we're able to see, what is happening in your area. Do we have similar, is the species growing within similar ecosystem or under similar, factors? Is the salinity the same? We need to find out more, we need to be doing more. So I say we're losing these bays.
Because I think from some of the work that I've been witnessing of, Dane Budo and also Discovery Bay, with some of the, let's say, the invasive species that is you learn from other places, or with the sharks in Mexico, they learn, or also the fish sanctuary, they're kind of trying to create an exchange, at least in helping to build, let's say, something like a fish sanctuary, to show like, it's these and these years it takes, this is what can be done, and this is a good sign, or something like this. So this does not exist for, let's say, bioluminescence, and also not for anything that's concerned about the toxic.
So that is one of my concerns. Could we if the species was found to be toxic, what will the tourists think of that? Will they start being afraid? I mean, there are concerns if these tourists are being allowed to, and locals who go on the tours, they're being allowed to swim. They're being encouraged to swim in the bay.
Yes.
Okay. And you're swimming amongst toxic species. That doesn't sound too good to me.
Are there any effects known that could be directly, that not via the food chain? No.
Not that I know. No. It's usually you have to consume an animal that has previously consumed the species. So there has to be some sort of time period where you have to build up the bad accumulation of the toxins in the tissues. I'm thinking, okay, a tourist is swimming and they ingest some water, could this be a problem? Maybe, we don't know. So, would it hurt the tourism industry in the area? If we start talking about toxins. A part of me, I suppose I should say off the record, a part of me wants to say, oh, toxins, people stop using the area, yay, the species will thrive again. I shouldn't do that. But there is that concern of the impact of talking about toxins, or finding that, the species is a toxic one, or potentially toxic.
Yeah.
What are the implications? But if it is, it is. And we need to talk about it. We need to determine if it is an issue. So that is a thought there. But there should be some sort of network. I need to,
Because in both ways, I mean, if let's say the glow gets less, and let's say it can be traced to the food chain, both would be very bad for the tourists.
Yeah.
In general, whereas if you would try to use that as a long-term ecotourism, the way that I understood the minister, that is kind of their idea, but depends on what you define as the ecotourism, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Not that I can recall. I mean, I often talk to the fishermen in the area because I find they're the users of the area. And by interviewing them, I'm getting information that can help me with my analysis. So they're saying, the glistening has been very bright this month. We've been having a lot of rain, etc. Like, okay, that's why numbers are low, perhaps. Or maybe the glistening has been really bright this month. So they can give me feedback on what's happening there. Actually, haven't heard any stories, but I keep on hearing people, they're just talking about being fascinated by, they just can't, they just want to hold on to this glistening all the time. It's like amazing, to see it, to experience it, to the point that they're like, what can we do to keep this going? Or,
Okay,
they're encouraged, they're like, just regular people, who not scientists, not, anything. It really has an impact on people who have experienced the area. That is my feeling. The fishermen as well, they're like, they don't know the science behind it, so they're like, it's amazing, we need to keep this going.
What do they say what it's for, or what it has been used?
I haven't heard a fisherman say anything about that. They have mentioned it, of course. They can track the fish, if they're doing fishing at night, glistening, because, as the fish move through the water, you see the glistening occurring with the movement there. So they can, yeah, that's what they did say. That helps them to track when they're fishing in the area, see what's there. If it's a stingray versus a fish, there's no point chasing after stingray, don't waste time with that. You can see the outline of the body with the glistening, the bioluminescence there. So yeah, that is the one thing that said. But in terms of anything really magic or thing, haven't heard about that. I don't know. Perhaps they do. I think I find many Jamaicans tend to be a bit. They don't want to talk about things like magic, sort of thing. You know.
Why?
A bit. I think might be coming from the fact it's a very Christian society. So from a religious point of view, you know, magic and obia and all those things, you know, like that's my impression of some of them. They don't want to think about it as magic, but more like God had put that there for me, you know, to make use of, sort of thing, you know. So it's a provision, something provided for me from God to help me, sort of thing, versus no. That's my impression. That's my impression there. Yeah.
And that the name phosphorus is actually like a little bit connected to the minerals. Is this a coincidence?
I mean, it's bioluminescence that is occurring, which is different from phosphorescence.
Yes, but they call it.
Yes, I know. It's often mixed up.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, phosphorus.
So maybe in the past there has been a connection, or people made a connection.
Could be. That is possible. Yes. Yeah.
Because this, I've not come across anyone calling it like this
true.
here.
They don't call it bioluminescence, and it is. It's always phosphorescence.
Yes.
That's the term they use.
But also with this term, you didn't come across stories where this has been connected to, I don't know, the history of this place or other kinds of beliefs. No. In just one paper, one I was talking to you about from the 60s, they mentioned that the grandmother, I think, of someone in the area, he remembers his grandmother talking about seeing the glowing there, and she was 80 years old at the time. So they were seeing, looking at the time span, this glowing has been going on for perhaps over 100 years, 200 years. So that was just a point they made, you know, like, wow, okay. So it's been there for a while. So if there would be like, let's say, a petition or something, do you think more of the community would be mobilized to kind of try to protect, or they couldn't?
I would think so. Why not? I mean, for many of them, it's their livelihood. I mean, if someone helped them to understand, you know, the importance of, and that they're, signing something, they're not, because they can get worried, like, what am I signing, am I going to get in trouble with this, what, sort of thing. I don't see why not. Yeah. I met somebody a few weeks ago who had experienced he did the tour, did the glistening waters, and he was just totally amazed, and he said, he has spoken to a whole lot of locals, telling them about his experience, and he's amazed at how many of our own people, they don't even know about it.
Oh, like, yeah.
How is that possible? How do you not know?
Yeah, I was.
It used to be 12. I heard of, like, maybe 10 years ago. I was hearing there's 12 left in the world. Now I'm hearing 6, and only 3, 4. So, I mean, just based on that alone, we should be doing everything to protect this bay. I mean, we're talking about the whole world here. Jamaica has something, a small part.